But I want to offer some ideas and some words of wisdom if you're feeling like you're on that edge of like, I don't think the sky's falling, but maybe it might be, and maybe some feelings are creeping up. And I want to give your mind some different ideas to play with. And so I have some thoughts and some overview and some perspectives that'll give your mind some other things to chew on rather than the what if. Because if we leave our mind unsupervised at this time, it is going to imagine a worst case scenario, probably. We're just kind of biologically disposed to be 2.5 times more likely to think a stressful thought than a supportive one. And for those of us who are energetically sensitive and empathic and feeling the collective around us, we're getting this vibrational influx of everyone else's feelings. And there are a lot of layers that we can ride out this experience. There are people who are passionate and optimistic and seeing the vision, and there are people who are mind-numbingly terrified and everything in between. And there's a certain amount of being able to tune into a vibration or a layer and match it. So if you're wanting to sort of step into a place of being like, yeah, this is a crazy new experience for all of humanity. We haven't really done anything that really looked like this with the circumstances of the modern era. It's a new thing, and how are we navigating through it? I want to offer hopefully a vibrational transmission from my guides of just the feeling of so much support on all levels and clarity. And I hope that I can offer something that's supportive. And if not, I feel like there's so much content right now. I just trust you'll wander over to something else or some other perspective. So one of the things I want to offer, you may be feeling like, hey, I'm okay, like fundamentally at the level of circumstance right now, I'm okay. But you may have a lot of stirred upness about your fears that other people might not be okay. When my theater plans were canceled, I can live with not going to the theater, but I was worried about the performers whose livelihood is performing in these theaters that I know, it's a moving target to make theater in the modern time. They really have to do a lot of fundraising to even cover the costs of production. So what happens for these actors in these theaters, or the food service workers, or there can be this feeling of like, maybe I'm well, but what about other people, and what if they're not well, and so it goes. So there can be a lot of tension and anxiety. So one of the things that I like to offer, and I like to say, and I like to have as an internal mantra, is this idea of being an ally instead of being accountable. And for a lot of stuff in our life, we are accountable. So if you have young children and you're a parent, then yeah, you are accountable for not only your well-being but the well-being of your children through this. Or if you're caring for an elderly parent, you have accountability. Or if you're a nurse on shift, then you have accountability for participating in the healthcare system. But for me, I don't have accountability for the performers I was hoping to go watch, but I can certainly be an ally to them. I can certainly say, no, you definitely don't have to refund my ticket price. If the show doesn't go forward, take it as a donation. So I can be an ally, because I just don't have the power and leverage to really be accountable. I don't have money at my disposal to just donate enough to pay everybody's expenses in the theaters that I like to go to. And one of the things to remember is, as we go through this is a time where humans are really resourceful. We get really stressed in times of change. We do not like uncertainty. We're hardwired to find it really, really, really unpleasant. But at the end of the day, humans are remarkably resourceful creatures. And one of the things to kind of bear in mind is the collaborative nature of solving this unforeseen circumstance and navigating through it. So it's on everyone's mind, and appropriately and first and foremost, hopefully people are figuring out what they need to do for themselves and the people they're accountable for to be well. So how do I feed my children? How do I make sure I have enough stocks in the refrigerator? How do I and take care of myself if I'm going into work? How do I, stay safe? Where do I get hand sanitizer? Hopefully first and foremost, we're taking care of ourselves because we have the most leverage. And then with what's left over, we can say, what can I contribute? What can I offer? What can I give to other people? How can I participate? And there are any number of people, like there are kind of three places that people could be. They're the people who are just not well at this moment. They're sick, they need intervention from the medical model, they're financially strapped, they need relief and help with that. They're melted down emotionally, they're just so terrified they can't function, because when you're frightened past a certain point, you just absolutely can't function. And then they're the people who are just doing them, and that's about all they can handle. It's taking all of their attention and their resourcefulness to not spin out into panic and, you know, have a hard time of it. And then they're the people who are resourced in some way, who can be in contribution. And wherever you are, and it may be a moving target, people who need extra support at whatever level, then the people in contribution are supplying that. And I think that's how humanity is moving with it overall. And it's good to identify where you are, because I want to encourage you, if you're really an empathic person who gets scared about the suffering of others and concerned, the invitation is to consider that, you know, you could just do you and then contribute as is appropriate. So, for example, even though I have an engineering degree, I am not in the engineering world, and so how to speed up production of much needed masks isn't something I can help with, but I can help with people who are emotionally really triggered. I have a group of people who are in my Patreon, and I'm doing a lot of work in sacred space and sitting here in my beautiful home making this video in the hopes that it'll help with someone who is vibrationally affected, you know, really feeling the collective energy and being overwhelmed by it, or someone who is emotionally scared because their brains run off without adult supervision, and it's imagining the worst case scenario and that they will have less resources to deal with a worse future. Like that's the scenario that our mind wants to explore, is everything, all these bad things are going to happen, and as these bad things happen over time, I will be in a worse and worse place because I will have eaten all my food, and then, you know, the power will go out, or the internet will go down, or, you know, things that there's no reason to think they'll happen. It'll mutate into something that kills hundreds and thousands of people in the next week. Like, you know, our minds come up with these really improbable but really scary scenarios, and that's where we want to give them something else to chew on. So I have some ideas about things that you could sort of think about as you go through this. One of the biggest, I think, is really good to hold is, well, two things actually. Obviously I have a ton of things to say, but one of them is really looking at the big picture, which is the global response to this pandemic has been to value life over economics. So the economy is in take apart. There are things that are like super amped up, and they aren't ramped up to meet the supply of how much more toilet people want on a short timeline, and how much food distribution is happening. And then at the same time, other things are closing down, like schools and theaters and group events that, you know, people are in with economically. But the global collective response is to say, in a world where a lot of times we think we value money over people, you know, a lot of the criticism of how things are done in systems is you're making money matter more than people, and that's not cool. Well, in this case, people are what's being valued. It's saying, look, we want to flatten the curve on this so that when people do end up at the hospital, we have enough respirators for them to have what they need. We want to take a huge hit, a huge take apart on this economic system of all these industries, and the government's like, we're going to put together an aid package because we know that the economy is going to really take a hit, and this is super problematic, and there are a lot of people without reserves, and it's a crazy time, and we're going to work on that, but in the meantime we're prioritizing life. And if you look back at human history, that's just not something that's really happened collectively. Like, slavery never would have happened if that was the ethos. You know, there's just no way. A lot of abuses that had economic outcome ever could have been a thing if humans were collectively deciding that the preservation of life and health and well-being, especially of vulnerable populations or populations that you might even not be a part of, is the most important thing. So really kind of eagle-eyeing that perspective and saying the people in power, awkwardly or gracefully, doing a good job, doing a medium job, clumsy, ill-prepared, whatever it is on the spectrum, ultimately the collective decision is to approach this problem from a preservation of human life, and we'll figure out the money subsequently. And that's really beautiful. There's a real beauty in that. And there might be something that allows you to sort of take a breath when you tune into that. Another thing to look at is just not realizing that we're all in our innovation. So we're all figuring this out from scratch because I don't think people anticipated that we would be in this situation. And sure, there's some protocols and there's some ideas, and maybe people are wisely looking at, you know, what other people have written the last time we had a pandemic, and maybe they're not. But granting some grace for the people who are figuring this out and maybe are being messy. So the reason is, you know, not for their sake, like, you know, elected officials are gonna, no matter what they do or don't do or how graceful or not graceful or what they achieve or what they don't achieve, they'll have huge fans and they'll have angry people and they'll have everything in between, and it'll be really noisy. So glad I'm not an elected official. Seems like a really hard job to have right now, to have to make those kind of choices. But I'm offering this because of the inner peace it may be able to provide for you. And so what I mean by that is, if you think like, okay, there's some really competent people who know a lot about systems and how to work with things, and they're needing to use the resources they have in a new way to solve a new problem, and they're the most qualified people to do that. So going back to that ramping up production for we need more masks than we have. We don't have enough masks for medical people, and it's a complicated process to make them. And you know that the factory people are working, you know, overtime to figure out how can we make this happen? How can we make this happen as fast as possible and get this out into the world as quickly as possible? But they know all the constraints. They know the supplies they have in stock. They know what they need to be ordering. They're scrambling. They're probably tired. They're, you know, they may not have the absolute most elegant solution. And I would argue that it's a place of peace if we give them grace around that, because then we can give ourselves grace for not being as elegant as we could. You know, there's that sort of armchair quarterback where you're watching a sports game and you're like, you should do the thing, but you have the camera view, like looking out at the whole field and seeing who's open. You're not like in this helmet with this restricted field of vision trying to like figure out like where you could throw the ball as people are running at you, you know, so frigging fast, you know. So, you know, it's very easy, you know, far away to see that, and we don't understand the constraints. So one of the things I want to remind everyone of, because again, I think it helps sort of relax into things, is this Dunning Kruger effect. And so the Dunning Kruger effect basically says, people who don't know a lot about things often are extremely confident that they know a lot about it. So at the beginning, there can be this high confidence in their knowledge when their knowledge is actually really limited. They don't know the systems. They don't understand the things. And then as they get a little more knowledge, they start to go, oh, wow, I don't know a lot about that. I really, it's a lot more complicated. So if you look at the logistics involved in, you know, mask making, for example, or food supply distribution, or the medical model tending people, you're like, wow, there are so many more moving parts than I thought. You know, it's so complicated. And then, you know, if you're somebody who's deeply engaged, over time you have knowledge and skill. But we want to remember that the people who are solving whatever area they're solving in are on the expertise side. They're the people who've spent more than 10,000 hours learning how to do bureaucracy, which is a complicated thing. How do government systems work? And those are the people solving the problems. So if you don't know a lot about something, it's hard to trust other people have expertise that we don't have. You know, there's a certain sort of instinctual relying on ourselves, and so it's hard to spot expertise in people we don't personally know and trust and go, oh, this person knows way more about the thing than I ever even am close to. Like I know not that much about how to run a government. It was an interesting question that I checked in about myself with, because Marianne Williamson was made a bid to be the next president of the United States, and I think she's magnificent. I think she's an inspiring speaker, and I think she's got a beautiful heart and a gorgeous light. And I didn't research it deeply, so I may be missing something, but I felt like at the same time she didn't have the expertise of a super complicated system. Like, how do politics work? How does bureaucracy work? What are the, you know, ways? I mean, you know, I'm vague on how a bill gets through Senate, I'll be honest. I got A's in the classes I took in high school back in the day, but gosh, that was a long time ago, and I admit I was just basically memorizing the information to pass the test. So all of that complexity, I'm way back on the, you know, maybe enough knowledge to know I know very, very little about that. And so my feeling was, I don't feel like I trust her. And again, I may be totally wrong. She may have massive experience I don't know about, but I felt like somebody who knew how to work with systems in a big way for these incredibly complicated things would have more of the qualifications. And that I would look to Marianne Williamson not to manage the presidency, but to be a visionary and to be an inspiration and to share amazing vibration and to have beautiful reflections, and totally value her, super aligned with what she offers insofar as I've delved into it. But there's that question. And so our instinct mind is going to want to think that we know the most about the thing and the problems that are being solved. But if you kind of think critically about it, you could be like, wow, there are people who know 1,000 times more than I do who are on this. So they're the scientists in the lab who understand virus and germ transmission and how to track it and how to vaccinate against it and all of those kind of things with this wild expertise, who are working like crazy in labs to solve their little corner of it, which is, let's understand how this propagates, let's understand what kills it, let's understand how long it lives on surfaces, let's understand how we best treat it. You know, there are these medical systems that are adapting and adjusting. All right, we're canceling, you know, not routine surgery, so all the resources are freed up if we get hit with a wave of this. They're the people who are looking at the economic systems and hammering out how do we mitigate the economic thwack of this, you know, this whole thing. So there are all these people involved who have all this expertise and all this knowledge, who are working away really, really diligently to figure this out. And really, all humans, you know, and I mean, I'm sure there are people in remote corners of the world who aren't connected to the internet, but, you know, all of us in first world countries particularly who are having these conversations are watching and understanding and being in the evaluation of how should I do my life. So a lot of holistic practitioners are looking at how can I step up my online presence or offer my gifts, like yoga teachers being like, okay, how do I teach yoga over Zoom or Skype? You know, what do I do with that? And then people creating content to teach yoga teachers how to teach yoga over Zoom or Skype. Like, there's this amazing movement of people solving their corner of what's theirs to solve. And I think that there's some relief to be had in that old wisdom, which is when you see a tragedy, look for the helpers. So, you know, the pain of 9/11, for example, rather than watching the towers destroyed, watching the blood bank lines that, you know, wind around the block because the blood banks filled to overflowing because people wanted to help, and the firefighters ran toward the burning buildings, which is what they do all the time. And there are all these beautiful helpers of people who are in that third category that I mentioned, which is I'm good, and then what can I contribute, what can I give? And seeing the helpers and seeing and just trusting, like the engineers. Like, I worked in production and project management and manufacturing and assembly as an engineer. Like I know that world, not enough to be of particular help because I don't know the specifics, but I know the brightness and the competence of those people who are figuring out, like they know manufacturing, they know systems, they know supplies, they know how to ramp production, and their best minds are completely engaged with the problem, so we can have toilet paper and hand sanitizer and the masks that the medical model needs, and compensate for people who are out of work with our food supply. Like they're just people working really, really hard on this, and tuning into that truth, I think, can provide some relief. And again, I just want to repeat the good enough, not perfect, for yourself more than anything, because if you're armchair quarterbacking the responses, and again, I think lots of dissection of how the government handles things and so on and so forth is going to happen. But if you're in the government is incompetent, if that's your story, the government is completely incompetent, they know nothing, they're going to do a horrible job of this, people are going to suffer horribly because they're awful and they can't do anything right. Well, I mean, overall, if we really eagle-eye that, I don't know that that's true. I would do the Byron Katie the work on that belief and say, well, gosh, I was able to drive to Trader Joe's because they're figuring out how to maintain the roads and power the stoplights, and this is a government endeavor, is just the infrastructure of having roads. And sure, occasionally there's a pothole or whatever, but overall they've found this way to have success. So you could look at the evidence that the government is competent. Not 100%, it's humans, we're not perfect. But if you're saying, I think they'll do a good enough job. I think that, things will fall through the cracks, and it's a great time for anyone who has extra resources to see where they can be of help to the people who are within their sphere of concern, and where they're able to act locally or, on a larger scale. Like, for sure, everyone who has something to give, who's taking care of their own needs, it's a wonderful time to be generous, to be in contribution, to be in service. And I'm not saying we should all just sit back and wait for the government to solve it by any means, but telling the story that they will do a good enough job, that they have a lot of expertise that we don't have, that there are lots of bright minds working on this problem diligently, and sure, 6 months later or 3 months later, we'll have a more elegant solution. We can already do that. We can look at all the different countries' responses to the coronavirus and say, wow, last I heard Vietnam was really knocking it out of the park, and Hong Kong did this amazing thing, and in the US we're stumbling a little more. But there's this huge range of levels of elegance and better ideas that came up and were implemented, and less good ideas, and yet most of us will all be well. And it's possible, I know that it's hard to look at people dying, but with all the quarantining that we're doing and everything else, on the tail end of flu season, when all is said and done, if we add up the numbers, there may actually be more life preserved from this time where we have this pandemic than there would have been if the flu season had just completed its journey in the normal way. And I'm not saying that's true, but when we entertain those possibilities of the unknown, but we make room for, it could be actually good, this could be really beautiful. Who knows if a child isn't going to be talking about how sweet it was to have this time off from school where they got to be home with mom or dad or both, and had some really sweet family time where they played games and watched movies and made popcorn and got to really be together as a family. And they might be like, yeah, we found ways to entertain ourselves, we went on hikes, there could be this really sweet thing that the children of today look back on and say, wow, this was some really rich time. Or maybe it's a time where people catch up on the sleep that they've missed, or go internal and take stock of their life. Like there's challenges and gifts, and I'm not wanting to put on the rose-colored glasses and go, this is going to be wonderful for everyone, but it is nice to look to what good could come out of this, what good could come out of this personally, and what good could come out of this collectively. So I hope this is helpful. Let me see if I have any more notes. Yeah. So yeah, just to sum up, remember the Dunning Kruger effect, probably saying that wrong, of just you may think that your knowledge is the summit of all knowledge, and therefore your idea of how to solve the problem may not be the way people solve it, because they may know 20 times more than you do about the complexities, and just being willing to trust in their expertise. And you may want to tune into this idea of what is good enough, what is enough, because that can be really helpful and valuable. And you, you remembering, just looking for the helpers, remembering that everyone's in this together, and really having some conversations with yourself, because if you can see a possibility of legitimate good that could come of this, it's going to ease up putting your imagination and your creativity to imagining how the sky could fall and things could be much, much, much worse, and you wouldn't have enough, and you wouldn't have your needs met, and you're going to be without toilet paper, and there isn't going to be enough food, and people are going to have their lives destroyed, and that, like, we're going to be in another, like, there are just so many scary stories. And if we're in our, like, wow, we as humanity are rocking our resourcefulness right now. Everyone is being resourceful about how to navigate their own life given their unique circumstances, and lots of people are being resourceful about how to help people during this time. So thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup. You can learn more about me and my work at my website, which is handsoverheart.com, and I am working away from home. I do my sessions online, so if you want some personal support, I would be so very glad to work with you.